closely coupled self-organizing systems in which multiple types of co-orientation constitutes communities of practice. Thus, the constitution of the organization in this, as an entity, develops recursively from the meta-conversations of multiple communities of practice. In this way, the meta-conversations surface as a way in which an entity emerges that's much bigger than any community of practice of which this was formed. So this is a big, broad whirlwind overview of this that I want to tease out for you without giving you this a little bit, as Jim goes, oh my gosh. It's a little hard for me to tease out some of the dialectics. Now I want to move to dialectics and theory building. As this overview suggests, Jim's work and those of his colleagues in the Montreal School has really left a true legacy in our field and contributed more than many other scholars in unpacking the notion of what an organization is, particularly through the role of language and communication. And I think this is absolutely central. It's a very different kind of model because its lens comes from there. So it seems really fitting to begin to kind of tease out what's going on in that and extend some of these constructs and chart some future directions primarily through the communication lens. In theory building, dialectics provides a way of discovering assumptions, of shifting perspectives, posing them differently. Poole and Van de Ven argue that the theorists, in trying to build a theory, should look for the tensions and the oppositions in their field of vision. They need to use them to stimulate the development of more encompassing theories. They also need to focus on theoretical debates around the issues, identities, and similar theories. Clearly, Taylor and Van Every have done this, embracing the logic and engaging this in dialogue with Giddens, Latour, White, and many others, and trying to look at looking at constructs like enactment, rules, and resources, and performative views of the organization. But Taylor and colleagues have also consciously pursued theoretical opposition as puzzles to discover, ways of relating, counterposing, and integrating them. So I want to look at these particular ways that we can kind of focus on theory building. A dialectical lens on theory building would suggest that theorists make choices, and they make choices about how they manage those tensions. The first choice that's in this literature is selection, which obscures the opposition, selects one pole and ignores the other, so really preserves the duality in it. The second choice is separation, or recognizing both sides of the pole and separating them to develop different aspects of a theory. Usually this is done in spatial separation, where you have levels like macro, micro, individual organization, or at different times, stage models, where you have this going on in the first stage, this in the second stage, or different topics, which are like treating the social in one area and the material in another. So this has a segmentation involved in it. Integration, the third one, combines those options through neutralizing them or creating a kind of forced merger, a type of balance. And transcendence, the fourth choice here, comes out of some of, and I'll talk a little more about each of these, a Hegelian kind of notion of reframing, synthesis that forms the dichotomies, and connection embraces the opposition. Let me unpack these just a little more here. The dialectical lens that I'm using here is really one that has been used in other theory building and comes from different scholars who've done it. The one that I'm primarily adding that I really think is exemplary in this theory is Bakhtin's notion of connection. And this is where, of course, these are held together reflexively and recursively through this process. So it differs entirely from the other that are involved. The ones that the separation part is not even in Jim's theory. There's not a lot of separating that goes on there. So this is highly commendable. And the selection part is not as common. What we normally see in theory building, in organizational theory, in the selection part, we often see, and we did this for a long period of time, we looked at the internal part of the organization and the external part. We kind of looked at them infusing each other, but we always privileged one over the other, and that's where the selection part comes in. The third one, like integration, to go back over it, actually merges and neutralizes. And we need some discussion about that one. In that theory building, people would say this is a compromise. This really still doesn't hold these two bipolar opposites in their privileged, respectful relationship. And so it sees it as kind of, an example of that would be mezzo. Mezzo level has been a really interesting kind of construct that was developed, and I see it as more like what I would call a compromise or a middle of the road in balancing that. So the two that I think exemplify the most as sophistication in theory building are transcendence and connection. Transcendence, also known as reframing, or synthesis, I don't like that word personally, it grows out of Hegel, but I personally don't like it very much, is an approach that actually looks at transforming the opposites. How can you make them into a new perspective? It looks at the push-pull in such a way that the tensions generate energy between those opposites. They're channeled and they're emerged into a new form. And in this way, they're transcended or transformed in what the opposition might be. Connection, drawn from Bakhtin's notion, is, I said, manages those dialectics not through higher order development, but perpetuating unity and difference within them. Connection then rejects teleology in favor of indeterminacy. So I'm going to use these 5 modes as kind of a basis for talking about this theory and pulling out a set of dialectics. There are many of them in this theory. There's so many of them, there's no way to tease them out. And as Bakhtin would say, most dialectical systems have subdialectics under them. And as a result of having those subdialectics, they offer even more dialectics to come in. So I will kind of play on part of that as I go through this. So the point I kind of want to make about this is that there are probably a little bit of ways of enriching robust theories if we rely on transcendence and connection as opposed to selection, separation, and opposition. I mean, in selection and integration in it. The other thing that dialectics does in theory building is it points out some inconsistency in new areas for development. So it creates its own recursivity by opening up and creating new space. And that's an important part about what's operating within that. Okay, let's look at these particular types of contradictions that are in this theory to kind of tease out how these were managed. And these are the 4 that I will be focusing on, and I'm going to unpack each of these in much more depth. So the first one that I'm going to be looking at is text and conversation is durable and fleeting. The organization is both univocal and multivocal. The flatland of the macro-micro, and the mediation of the subject and the object. So let me go through each of these.